Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Afternoons with the Ambassador. And today we are resuming our Babylon 5 series review. And with me today, I've got my two good friends, my two fellow Babylonians, Dega Outlaw and Mountains of Elysium. And to the chat very quickly, DJ Odyssey and Moira Kitty, welcome. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Hope y'all are doing well. Hope your Monday has been a good one thus far. And David G. Sound, welcome, sir. Thank you for tuning in. So, gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Pretty wonderful.
In the immortal words of Big Gay Al, I'm super. Thanks for asking. So. All right, guys. Well, today we are covering the episode Signs and Portents, and this is the start of some big things in the B5 universe. So, yeah, this is gonna be a very interesting episode. There's a lot to talk about, so we won't stand on a bunch of ceremony, guys. Where do you want to begin?
I suppose you start with, what do you want?
Yes, the infamous question. What do you want? Why? Who are you? That'll come later, though. Yeah, we get our introduction to Mr. Morden, as he will become known, because we never get a first name, at least not as I'm aware of. So, if either one of you know the name of Mr. Morden, please, by all means, share, because I have never heard a first name given to this guy.
I think it was never actually given because JMS wanted to leave him as just Mr. Morden.
Yeah, and
it's a bit mysterious.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that adds a bit of mystery, a little bit of a sinister feel to him. So I think that was a good move on JMS's part. So, Mr. Morden, this guy will play a big role in the down through into season 4 and everything of Babylon 5. He is not a minor player, and we don't know a whole lot about him except for the fact, as he said at the beginning of the episode, I've been kind of out of circulation recently, been doing some exploring out on the rim. So, and yeah, he's going around to all the different ambassadors on the station asking one question: what do you want? And he gets a different response every single time, except for one particular ambassador and everything who doesn't even answer his question, just tells him to leave. They are not for you. Go now.
Something about him, too. I don't know if you guys noticed. Maybe you did, and I don't know if it was on purpose. I could never find it. Maybe one of you know. But in the pilot and 1 or 2 episodes, he was actually on CNC.
Actually, yeah, I did pick that up and everything, but you never got a really good look at him or anything. So that was a nice little piece of.
He had speaking parts. Also, considering who he works for and how capable they are, maybe he was doing groundwork before he even got in. I don't know.
Yeah, because
go ahead.
I think it's never. I'm not sure how long the Icarus was missing for, so it could very well be. I think his name was Garcia in the pilot.
That might have been right. I'd have to go back and rewatch the pilot to be sure, but
I don't think they're meant to be linked. But if we're doing kind of looking back on it, you could actually make the link, and it could be possible.
It's a nice little fan theory and everything that maybe Mord was doing groundwork for the Shadows before he even was a named character and came on board formally as an agent for the Shadows as Mr. Morden. So it's a possibility, but I just think maybe they used him as an extra and they didn't think they didn't know at that point if the show was going to take off or not, and obviously it did. So they decided to bring him back and everything as Mr. Morden.
Well, here's the backstory for him, if you don't mind, because
go for it.
I believe, and I'll have to look it up. I'm just going off of bad memory. I believe the Icarus has been gone for almost 2 years, and when the Icarus was supposedly destroyed. We find out later, everyone, you know, I'm not worried about spoilers, that it actually landed on Zahadum, and they found some of the shadows, just like Guardians, that were awake. They were fascinated because of the technology that was there. The technology utilized, they noticed some of it had like little small creatures as was controlling CPUs for lights and little cleaning bots and different things. Then they ran into the shadows, and the shadows said, all right, we have fresh units, unless you want to work for us. And no one on the Icarus would, except through the interviews of Mr. Morden, they found something that they could work with. It was a few years back. He was basically a real good guy, married, devoted to his wife. And she got in a ship, went through one of the jump gates, and the jump gate failed. The assumption for everybody was that the ship was destroyed in the jump gate. The shadows lied or told the truth. It was never explained that she actually made it through the jump gate, but the ship was lost in hyperspace. They told him, you work for us, we will find her for you.
Well, and you know, here's the thing about the shadows. They will sometimes tell the truth, even if you don't want to hear it, because here's the thing. And like I said, we're not necessarily spoiling anything for a 20 or 30-year-old some odd show. The guy that Sheridan meets on Zahadum when Anna brings him back with her. The one elderly gentleman, Justin. We don't know where Justin came from. We just know that he's been there for a while, more than likely. And the thing about the shadows, they will tell you the truth, even if the truth is unpleasant. So my feeling is maybe they were telling him partially the truth to get him on their side, because I'm not trying to play. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a minute. The shadows are known as Lords of Disorder. The Warlords known as Lords of Order, and what have you. And even as Lords of Disorder, they still want people to see things from their perspective. So they're going to at least tell a better chunk of the truth to a person to sway them to their side, rather than just flat out lie to them. Because although I don't agree with the Shadows philosophy, we get the impression that maybe once upon a time they weren't as sinister and as twisted and as evil as they are portrayed in the show. But that's just me playing devil's advocate. So, gentlemen, I don't know what you think about that or anything. If there's any validity or if there's any truth to what I had to say.
No, I'd agree with you. I think in was it in season 4 they do mention that both Vorlon and Shadow were initially shepherds who did guide and did look after the races.
Yeah, the younger races.
They were shepherding, but that they became more entrenched in their beliefs and became more extreme on either end, and really both became nasty to a greater extent or another. And so, yeah, and you can see, I suppose, to Mr. Morden, they do say that it was either you serve or you die. And so also that was another element going into his decision to serve. Not just that he would find help with his wife, but that he'd also die if he didn't. So condemning both himself and her to death.
Well, if I remember right from the book, he didn't, and Anna Sheridan had tried to sway him from making the bad decision. And that's when they slapped her into a ship. He saw that and thought, well, not I'm only going to lose my wife, but then I'm going to serve them one way or another. So if I'm going to choose to serve them, instead of being a mechanism in a ship, I am going to try and save my family.
Yeah. And just briefly to the chat, Speaker for the Dead and Captain Trek, welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. Glad to see you both. So, well, and you know, and here's the thing. the shadows always give you a choice. Either service one way or service another. And, you know, even though your options aren't the best, it's much better to work for the shadows than just be stuck in one of their ships and eventually die. So, but, you know, there's a whole, as I mentioned at the opening and everything, there's a whole lot going on in this episode, because not only do you have Morden going around to the various ambassadors and them giving their responses to him and what have you, you've also got a situation with the Raiders and everything, and of course you've got the whole situation with the eye of the Centauri Emperor and everything that Londo finally gets his hands on. And I honestly liked that interaction at the beginning of the episode and everything with Londo and Mr. Reno and what have you, because it kind of gives you a bit of foreshadowing to what Mr. Garibaldi is going to be doing, particularly after the end of the Shadow War. Because Garibaldi kind of becomes one of these people that does the same thing that Mr. Reno does. He tracks down people, he tracks down objects, and so on. So, yeah, that's that right there. That's a bit of interesting, a little bit of an interesting story and everything in the episode and everything involving Londo, because Londo's like ecstatic beyond all reason that this guy and everything has found the eye of the Centauri Republic and everything. And I'll say this, it was a nice looking prop and everything considering the budget for the show. But, of course, you've got the whole matter with Lord Kiro and his aunt and everything, if I remember correctly, who is a seer and everything, who can see the future and so on. And their whole part in this episode. So, gentlemen, anything you want to comment along those lines on that part?
I think was it Reno, the man who finds it. I always felt he was connected with the Raiders, because he reappears in season 2 as the when that doctor from Earth Force was on the run, who had the information on Clark or on he was a guy who refused to sell him the identity cards. So I always felt that when the Raiders went, he was stuck in Babylon 5 and ended up becoming a petty criminal. He could no longer become like the big guy who could find the eye, but was basically demoted within the criminal world, which I found was interesting.
Well, yeah, and, you know, there's that whole interaction there in that bar or club or whatever and everything when Londo is given the eye by Mr. Reno, and Londo's like, what did you do to find this? And Reno's like, you don't want to know. You really don't. But here's the thing. Londo's the type of person, his hands are not entirely clean in this matter and everything, and other matters as well. He's had to get his hands dirty to do things. So I think Londo wouldn't have been necessarily disturbed and everything to find out what Reno had to do to get the eye back into Londo's hands and back into the Centauri Republic's hands in general. So
I think Londo's enough of a politician to not really worry about getting his hands dirty. So yes, and we see he gets his hands fairly dirty from here on in.
Oh yeah, very much so. So, well, and you know, here's the interesting thing about Morden going to the different ambassadors and asking them that question: what do you want? And every one of them has a different reaction to Morden's question. Londo just kind of shrugs his shoulders. He's like, "You're a very persistent young man." And Morden's like, "I have to be." And you think, yeah, because consider who he's working for, even though we don't necessarily know at this point who he's working for. But one interaction in particular that very much intrigues me is Morden's interaction with Delenn and everything on there and everything in her quarters. And she has that that triangle and everything that appears on her forehead. And guys, maybe you can fill me in on this. What exactly is the significance of that triangle on her forehead?
So I'm not exactly sure. I do know it appeared, I think, in was it the pilot or in one of the earlier episodes on one of the other Minbari members who had interrogated Sinclair.
Yeah,
it
it
with
was
the when oh gosh, what are they?
the Great
Shock
Council.
Tot, the Deathwalkers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Deathwalkers.
The one
no,
showed up and wanted to make
Hunters.
sure.
Soul
Yeah,
Hunters.
Soul Hunters. They had to make sure that Sinclair wasn't remembering, and he was there just to advise from the council. From what I'm led to believe, it is a type of tattoo that is given to anyone in the Great Council. And what the significance of it is, you could see under high stress, it not only alerts them, but it also becomes visible.
Yeah. Well, you know, and
there is something I wanted to. We can jump back to this, but I don't want to miss it simply because it's on the forefront of my mind, and it was such a small couple of minutes, but huge for the whole arc. When Sinclair puts Garibaldi to task, he says, "There's bits and pieces of my memory that are starting to come back," and he explains to them explains to Garibaldi what happens on the Battle of the Line, and says, "Can you find it for me?" And surprisingly, Garibaldi comes back fairly quickly and says, "You weren't supposed to get this position.
Yeah.
There were admirals, there were generals, there were other people that were supposed to get it. And the only reason why you got it is simply because the Minbari, in accordance with the deal they had with Earth, got to pick who it was. They wanted him specifically."
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, that's a very important piece of world building right there, and everything. It kind of fleshes out Sinclair's backstory and his connection to the Minbari as the rest of the season will go on. We do get more of that. And to the chat very quickly, number one sci-fi greetings, sir. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for tuning in today. So, but yeah, honestly, Adega, I'm glad you brought that up because I did want to talk about it because. Again, it goes to Garibaldi's capabilities as a investigator, as a person who can find information or find people. And as I mentioned previously, Mr. Reno is kind of a foreshadow of what Garibaldi becomes later on in the series. And it very much, it also leans to what's the word I want to use here? It also goes to building the friendship between Sinclair and between Garibaldi and everything, because Sinclair is coming to him not just because he's the security officer there on the station, but because he very much considers Garibaldi a friend and everything. Sinclair does, and I think that was a nice moment and everything there in the episode when Sinclair just spills his guts to Garibaldi and tells him about everything that happened at the Battle of the Line and what have you. And yeah, I mean, that's an important moment. There's a lot of important moments in this episode because not only do we have Morden and everything going around to the different ambassadors on the station, not only do we have Sinclair telling Garibaldi, "Hey, I've gone as far as I can go. I need you to do what you need to do and everything to figure out what happened to me during that time that was missing and everything," kind of alluding back to the episode that we discussed a week or so ago involving the two interrogators that came to the station and abducted Sinclair and put him through that whole holographic interrogation. So, and Superior Hero Reviews, hey, bud, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. So,
quick question. I have my own thoughts on this.
Sure.
But I pass it, and I know Elysium's been thinking about it quite hard, or at least that's the impression I've been getting. What would you consider Morden was looking for in an answer to the question that he was posing it to everybody, and why did Mollari fit the bill? Maybe obvious to some, maybe not to others, but I just wanted to see your feelings before I said mine.
Sure. Mountains, go ahead.
I do believe Morden was looking for someone with ambition and with power to back it up, because I believe it was that the non-aligned worlds, there's no race there powerful enough to do the Shadows bidding what they want. So that leaves the Centauri, Earth, the Minbari, and the Narn. And he first went to see the Narn, who were basically just after revenge. And after, I believe, Jakar put a pretty brutal speech in what he wanted to do to the Centauri. But he said, and then what? The answer, I don't really care, I think was enough for Morden to say, okay, these are not who we want. Where he found in Londo somebody who was very competent. The Centauri many of them have a chip on their shoulder because Emperor Turan is taking them into a more peaceful and coexistence with their neighbors, where they want to be the power again in the galaxy. And they found a good proxy in the Centauri to do what they want. But I always wondered how he got that answer out of the ambassadors, because they were at first dismissive, and we've seen in other episodes they just flat out tell people go away. In Believers, they told it's no benefit to us. Why would I even speak? So there must have been something else going on. Possibly the Shadows have some prompting that got each of the ambassadors to give an answer. And I wondered too why they approached the Minbari, because they know they had fought them in the past. And I wondered, were they approaching them to see could they be turned at this stage? That was my take on it.
Well, my perspective on this is that question is very open-ended, obviously. And I think Morden I think there was honestly a particular order that he was going in on the station. Now, the thing that intrigues me is the fact that Morden never approaches anybody from Earth Force. At least, no, he doesn't. Because he goes to Jakar, he goes to Londo, and he goes to the Lin and everything. And then, of course, he has his little off-screen confrontation with Kosh and everything during the Raider attack on the station. And and that's the one. In Mountains, you bring up an interesting point, because the Shadows would remember that the Minbari worked with the other first ones and the other races during the first Shadows War. And I don't know if maybe if Morden approached Delenn because maybe the Shadows were trying to feel them out, see if their alliance with the Vorlons was still in place, to see if they were going to still be a threat to him, or maybe if that alliance with the Vorlons was a one-time thing, and after the Shadows had been pushed back and everything, that alliance had kind of went poof, had kind of evaporated. With the Narns, I think Morden got he got a gauge of where the Narn mindset was. All he wanted to do, all the Narn wanted to do was basically destroy the Centauri, and that was it. I don't think the Narn would have gone as far as the Centauri would have in attacking the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, not to mention possibly attacking Earth, because the Narn would have had a good gauge of what trying to go into direct combat with Earth would have been like, considering the fact we had made a massive technological jump since the Earth Minbari War. And with finally going to Londo, he was in the right frame of mind. He was in the right place unfortunately, he was in the wrong place at the right time for the Shadows to manipulate Londo, to manipulate the Centauri, to be their proxies. Because here's the thing. We discover, obviously, that Lord Kiro is working with the Raiders and everything to try and get them to put him in as Emperor of the Centauri Republic because he's recovered the eye. I don't know if the Shadows necessarily had a hand in helping this Reno guy get the eye back or not, but I think they saw an opportunity and they seized upon it. Although maybe somehow or another the Shadows had contacts with Reno's organization and Reno himself, and they saw an opportunity to destroy that vessel and what have you, and bring the eye give the eye to Morden, and Morden give it back to Londo, and they've got Londo in their pocket, hook, line, and sinker, and by proxy, they've got the Centauri in their pocket. So, but I would have been very interested to see what an encounter between Morden and somebody from Earth Force would have been like and everything, because
that's the thing. They didn't go to Earth Force. They already knew that there was a Psi Corps, and that's where they were already at. They didn't need to visit anybody on Babylon 5. They had already infiltrated in, and they had a group in Psi Corps. And from what I am led to believe, whether or not it's accurate, but from what I'm inferring a lot, the whole setup with the Raiders, some of the events that had happened on Babylon 5 were more than likely all had hands in it from monkeying by the Shadows. Could even be part of the Home Guard, those people, the racists, trying to fuel sudden hatred for anyone outside, to develop a human race that's prepared to fight, because they saw value. Well, everybody sees value in the humans in this show. You know, you want to either be on their side or you want them out of the way. They're a danger to everybody, and you don't piss off an anthill because they come back twice as strong. That's actually a phrase that is used by Morden later on. Speaker also said, and this is the Shadows saw the Centauri pride and knew it could be turned into a weapon. Now, the way Londo responded to it, and it's just like all of you alluded to, there was a mark of his personality that pride would lead him to wherever they wanted him to go. Some people have pride, but it won't lead them to murder or genocide. They saw in Londo they could get there. Even though Londo eventually turns back and regrets what he did, it was enough for them to start their campaign, to have the allies that they needed, and to build their war machine into what it became, or what they were attempting it to become.
So, well, and you know, that's the interesting thing about this episode, because as the old saying goes, and even Londo says it in the first TV movie, in the beginning, pride goeth before a fall. And it was Centauri pride that brought them to their knees, because of their alliance with the Shadows, their betrayal of the Shadows, the Drakh exacting their revenge for the Shadows, and ultimately the Centauri turning against the ISA, the Interstellar Alliance, and them being bombarded and everything, the Centauri homeworld being bombarded by the ISA, not to mention the Drakh themselves. And this all links back to Londo. And that one speech that he makes and everything in this episode, he's like, I want my people to be what they once were. I want our race to be respected and feared again. I want to see our people take their place amongst the stars where they were before all of this.
Well, he got what he wanted, just it didn't last.
Yeah, it did.
Which is what the shadows wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, here's another question for you, if you don't
Sure.
mind me asking. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but this is a fascinating episode, and I wanted to try and, at least in my opinion, see how you guys felt about it. You brought up an interesting question when they were going to the different ambassadors. The shadows knew the Minbari had fought against them before, and yet they went to Delenn. Could it be, even though the Minbari felt that the shadows were moving quietly, could it have been that they deliberately went in there to taunt her and say, we're ready for you this time, or we are getting ready, or look out, look behind your back, we are, even though according to the Minbari they thought that they had the drop on the shadows?
Yeah.
You see what I'm asking?
Yeah, Elysium, go ahead, please.
Now, I was wondering, we see in later series that the Minbari are not the united front they appear to be. So I'm wondering, was Morden trying to drive a wedge and see, will the religious caste move? Or maybe there may be more agents on Minbar working at the in the background on the warrior caste. I wonder, have they anything to do with the wind swords that we talked about in previous episodes? So there may be shadow elements working, and they may be just putting out feelers more than taunting, because I do know in later episodes, Delenn mentions, if the shadows know, we know of them, they'll move. So I wouldn't think that they were taunting, but I do think they were trying to figure out, could they use the Minbari?
Yeah, because here's the thing. We do find out, not particularly in this season, but in later we do find out in this season a little bit. The Centauri are not the united front that we are led to believe that they are. And I think one other thing that's going on in this episode is maybe, because as I said, Morden avoids Kosh at one point during the episode, and during another point, he kind of stands his ground there in that hallway when the hallway goes dark. And then we find out later towards the end of the episode that Kosh's encounter suit got damaged. We assume, and he uses the cover of the attack on the station to kind of explain that away. But here's my question. Was Morden there alone, or was there a shadow with him? Because remember in season 2, Delenn says Morden is never alone. So the question becomes, how did Morden have some sort of weapon on his person that was immune or undetectable by weapon scan and everything when he came onto the station? Or was there a shadow on this with Morden on the station that damaged Kosh's suit? Because here's the thing. If a shadow attacks Kosh, that breaks the treaty, the ceasefire, or whatever you want to call it, between the Vorlons and the Shadows. And did Kosh simply not report that attack back to the rest of the Vorlons? So, how did Kosh's suit get damaged?
In my opinion, I think it was a shoving match. You know, you're walking a hallway, you see someone in, the high school thing, simple stuff. Someone you're pissed at, they're pissed at you, and instead of getting out of the way, you just bump shoulders, give dirty looks, and move on. Only in this scale, it's from species that have been around a while and have significant power, where the shadow probably said, we're going to kind of smash the side of your encounter suit, and Kosh probably took an antenna or a leg off of one of the shadows and just said, you know what? We're dealing with serious business all over again. And they're just, seeing who could pee farther.
And that's entirely possible too. And, as I said, maybe Morden had some sort of weapon on his person that could damage a Vorlon and countersuit, because let's be candid here. We know Vorlon and countersuits, they have heavy shielding. We know Kosh is dead. We know Yulkesh is dead, obviously. So it's probably a standard set and everything. He can throw up an energy shield anytime he wants to and everything to deflect any type of damage away from him. So who knows? I mean, it's one of those things. It's a big what if. We don't know exactly how Kosh's suit got damaged. We don't know exactly the rest of that that encounter between Kosh and Morden. It's just something we have to kind of play around with in our heads, essentially. So, I did want to ask you.
Like, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was thinking it kind of felt like the Shadows giving Kosh a wedgie more than anything else, that they were never going to hurt him, but they just kind of slapped his encounter suit around a bit.
Yeah, well, let's be candid here. I don't see Kosh taking any guff from anybody, not much less a Shadow. I get the impression that I
was saying that's true, that Kosh is not one to, I think,
he's certainly not going to take guff. If he's not going to take guff from Sheridan, he's not going to take guff from a Shadow. Period. So something tells me there was a bit of a tussle there in that hallway between which parties we don't know for sure. We know Kosh is involved, but we don't know who the aggressor was. We don't know if it was Morden. We don't know if it was a Shadow. So, one question I did want to bring up is the whole thing about Lay Ladira and everything. The aunt to Lord Kiro and everything. What did you think of her part in this episode? Because she's not necessarily a telepath; she's a seer. She can see the future. Now, I know telepathy and forecasting of the future do kind of go hand in hand, but you get the impression she isn't so much a telepath, more so than she is a pure seer. What do you all think of including something like that in Babylon 5?
Well, I think she does say that it's one possible future.
Mm-hmm.
And when the fact that she can project those visions into St. Clair, she probably has some telepathic ability as well. And I suppose this is foreshadowing what happens with the Vorlons. They're well able to do it at multiple people at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, we do see that most of her, what she says, does come true one way or another.
Yeah.
So I do wonder about it sometimes, because I have a theory that the Vorlons are far more active in manipulating circumstances than we actually see on screen, using a similar type of projection.
Yeah, that's entirely possible too.
Another thing about the Centauri, their entire race seems to be gifted, because each one of them, early on in their life, know when they're going to die.
Yeah.
That in itself is a type of prophecy. So all of them have that little bit.
Yeah,
they have the seers. They have their own telepaths, which could do certain things. So each and every one of them has a sensitivity to it. So they are quite a gifted race in that regard. And which another reason why they would be of value to the Shadows.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because amongst the different races, obviously we've talked about this previously with the episode and everything involving Jason Ironheart. Humans are the most powerful telepaths in the B5 universe that we're aware of. That's not to say that Minbari telepaths and even Centauri telepaths are any slouch or anything, but we get the impression that human telepaths are top of the line. Because look what the Vorlons do to Lita Alexander down the road. And essentially she is the telepathic equivalent of a thermonuclear device. And not only that, she houses so much Vorlon history and knowledge and so on and everything. And we get a piece of that in one of the TV movies, Third Space, which we'll get to and everything in due course. But, you know, I've always found it interesting that we in our own history have had people who have been regarded as seers or people that have the gift of precognition, who can see the future. And, unfortunately, there are those that are legitimate, but unfortunately, we also have those that are complete and total fakes. And that's something that's always been intriguing to me, and everything that we as a species are slowly evolving and everything throughout the history of our existence. And it intrigues me that maybe what we got in Babylon 5 is a picture of a possible future for ourselves as a species, that we will evolve to a point where we have, I don't know the percentage and everything of what the percentage of telepaths and what they call mundanes or normals is and everything in Babylon 5. But maybe this whole idea that there are more telepaths out there in the world today than we actually realize. So that's something and everything that I think this episode and that Babylon 5 in general tries to explore, and I think does a decent job at, because not only do we have telepaths in our own world, but you see that this is something that is common in other species, because we don't know if there are telepaths amongst the different races that make up the League of Non-Aligned Worlds or not, but you can make an educated guess that there most likely are telepaths amongst the Drazi and the Pakmara and the other races that make up the League. So, but that's something that's always been intriguing to me. And, I'll say this for Sinclair and everything to kind of segue to another topic. You see his ability as a strategist in this episode, particularly when the Raiders attack Babylon 5. And you have him basically say, okay, it's time to close the box. And he brings Ivanova's squadron of Star Furies in from one end of the station and everything. You've got Garibaldi out there as well. And I think that's a very cool moment for Sinclair. So, Star Wars Santa, welcome, sir. Thank you for popping in. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing well, sir. But guys, any thoughts on that particular part of the episode and everything involving Sinclair and the assault and everything on Babylon 5?
Yeah, he seemed to be no slouch when in command, and I do believe it was Lowrunner mentioned it, that he liked the touch that they had to take down the defenses to recalibrate to fire. Was it 3 kilometers for was it close range or long range fire? So it was. I just found it pardon me. I found it really good that they showed someone who had the tactical know-how. That look, even though that puts us at a disadvantage at the moment, it gives us the win. And
go ahead.
I think in many other franchises, they say, oh, this guy is a good tactician, and we win. Where here, it actually shows him thinking through a problem. Even though something puts them at a disadvantage, they turn around, they win, and pardon me. And it shows him not to be just a script, commander, that he actually showed by action he is the guy they're talking about.
Yeah.
Some of you may know, I had done a month ago one of those author tube things where they do little seminars with not all of them, but a lot of the YouTube authors. Well, one recently, and I chose not to participate in it, was something called show, don't tell in writing. And what Elysium was basically saying was a perfect example of where I was saying, he's a great tactician. Instead of saying it, put them in the position, let them work it out, and you could figure it out by watching what they do instead of being told what they do. The other thing about it is that this is Sinclair who becomes Valen.
Yep.
he is the greatest Minbari that they ever had, in their opinion. Not realizing, of course, he was human, but he had a long, long family history of fighter pilots. He grew up hearing stories of tactics and of battles. He had learned how to be also the, what do they call them? The warrior priest, being a Jesuit. So showing what this person was going to become was a brilliant part of the episode. Not just saying, well, I'm going to send fighters, oh, I figured this out. It actually said, I am going to set a trap on the fly and eliminate the problem once and for all.
Yep, pretty much. Because obviously the attack on the station fails. They lose one pilot, another one's in med bay and everything. And I think that was a nice moment right there and everything when Garibaldi is giving the sit rep the post action report to Sinclair and what have you. And you feel that weight and everything, because even one pilot loss is one too many for them, because these guys, they realize that they're in charge of taking care of the crew and the pilots and everything on the station. So even one pilot being lost, it weighs on them some. But ultimately, the Raiders are pretty much wiped out and everything, because they lose all their ships in the attack, and then of course that big carrier ship that they have and everything gets destroyed by a shadow vessel. I mean, let's face it. That thing, without any fighters and everything, and obviously it doesn't look like it's carrying any onboard weaponry itself and everything. As Garibaldi says, it's just a big moving target. We'll get it eventually. Well, they don't ever get a chance because the shadows take care of it for them. Thank you, shadows. In a matter of speaking. So,
but still, it shows the power of the shadows. They basically one-shotted a capital ship, and it gives us a foretaste of what we're going to see.
Yeah,
actually, it was just as Dega mentioned, just to go back on Sinclair being the best Minbari. Within this, he shows himself to be the warrior. In the previous, he shows himself to be the worker. He took care of the workers, and he was also the spiritual leader. So in the past 2 episodes, he's shown the 3 aspects of his Minbari nature and showed himself to be the best of all. He worked for the workers. He turned the idea that space is a new aspect of spirituality for Jakar, and basically worked for their religion. And here he shows himself to be the tactician who wins the previous Shadow War. So it's... And I hadn't thought of it until Dega had mentioned it.
Guys, Mountains of Dega, you know what? You're right. I had never caught on to that until you just now mentioned it. These last few episodes have shown the 3 aspects of the Minbari nature of the Minbari caste system, and shown them within Sinclair, which obviously is foreshadowing who he becomes later, and that's obviously Valen. Wow. Mind blown.
Just to mention, as Delenn said, it was humans are the most dangerous race in the galaxy because they build communities.
Yeah.
And just going back within the one man, you've built a community of 3. So the human nature brings all 3 together and shows himself to be the best of Minbari. And it, again, thank you, Adega. I hadn't thought of that before you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, very astute, John. Yeah, Adega, just wanted to comment. Yeah. Show, don't tell. It's an important piece of storytelling, whether it's a visual medium or if it's a written medium. You need to show evidence of why a person is good at X. You just can't say, oh, you just can't you can't put a phrase in there or a couple of sentences or a paragraph and say, yeah, this person's good at X, but never give any examples of it.
That's something that you could take with any of the modern shows right now.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I am one who believes there's a balance in between, but there's an awful lot of authors that think that you it's far, far better to show instead of tell. Now, there's a lot of virtues to that, but there are times when you need to tell instead of show, and you'll see it in my writing. I use both. But when you're looking at the modern programs nowadays, you are seeing tell. They're doing more of this psycho propaganda babble at you instead of entertaining, and that's where people are missing it. We're not seeing it. We're hearing your stuff, and we don't want to hear it. We want to experience it.
Yeah, it's a lot cooler to see a person in action doing what they have been touted to be capable of, rather than just you telling us and everything and we never see it. And it's the author or it's the director or whoever's job to put that on the screen for us to see. And in a few episodes, we have seen the dynamic of what it means to be a Minbari worker, a Minbari religious person, and a Minbari warrior in Sinclair. And not to mention, that is honestly a dynamic that exists in our own culture as well. Everything, maybe not the caste system so much, but the different archetypes maybe of what a person can be and everything in life. And to the chat, Macworld Entertainment, Trey, good to see you, my friend. Thank you for popping in. I appreciate it, as always.
Well, gentlemen, you know what time it is for me. I'm going to let you finish up the program. It was awesome, and I always have loved this episode.
Yeah, same here. Well, and we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes anyway. So, Dega, are you going up? I'm guessing you're going to be on Fortune Barber's channel here in a little bit.
Yeah. So all you guys, take care. Thanks for being here. Hi to everyone that said hi to everybody. So we'll catch you later.
Take care, Dega.
Talk to you later, bud. Well, and folks, with that, we are going to wrap up and everything, because I think we've pretty much dissected this episode, and it's been a lot of fun and everything. This was a good episode. It had a lot of parts in it, and it had a lot to Trey, that's okay, my friend, and everything. I appreciate you being here regardless. So thank you for tuning in as always. But yeah, folks, that's, as I said, that's going to wrap it up for today and everything. I want to thank Mountains of Elysium, and I want to thank Adega for being on with me once again. This has been a lot of fun. We've kind of built our own gray council right here. We just need to pick. We need to figure out which cast each one of us is. So, but folks, just a thank you again for y'all tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. For those of you that will catch us on the replay, I hope you enjoyed the discussion. As always, hit that like and share, subscribe and share button and everything. Leave a comment down in the comment section and everything about our discussion today. Just a quick update and everything for this week and everything actually later this evening on Let's Talk Star Wars. I'll be on there once again, be at 5:30 Central Time. We're going to be talking about one of the really great villains of the Star Trek universe, and that is, of course, the Borg. So be sure to tune in for that. And then this weekend, I will be back with another installment of the Ambassadorial Wing. That'll be Saturday night at 7:30 Central Time. And we're going to be talking about Jurassic Park. So be sure to tune in for that as well. And y'all have a great day. I will hopefully see some of you this evening. And I will see you around Twitter and Discord and all those other places. So until next time, folks, this is the Ambassador signing off.